heard a lot of different, foundational principles. At least I've been learning a lot about leadership, ethics, different things like that. I'm going to probably focus a lot more on action in terms of like just my experience, and then some questions that I want you guys to think about that I'm constantly asking myself. And then, so this will be more probably like experience-based. I'll go through some passages, but these are kind of like 3 questions I want to ask in this time. And I'll start off with some story to give you guys context on where I'm coming from. So I grew up in the greater DC area in Maryland, in a very safe, comfortable suburb. I lived in Hong Kong for a few years before moving back to Maryland, and come from a very non-Asian family. My mom was a journalist, and my dad was a musician, which is like the 2 no-nos for Asian people. Grew up in a very sort of artistic family. My parents were Christian, but after we got back from Hong Kong, we just stopped going to church, and me and my brother started doing our own thing. My brother joined a gang very early on, and he was sort of the person that I looked up to. Loved video games and basketball growing up, though. So that's how I got plugged into church, like in a nice suburb. If you want to play basketball in the off season, you join a church basketball league, so I did that. And if you join a church basketball league, you have to go to church service, unfortunately. So that's how I first got plugged in. And our youth pastor was like very, very interested in inner city missions. Our church would do stuff in Nashville and West Kensington, Philly, and Anacostia, DC, and all these different places. So he invited me to a mission trip in Nashville. That's how I got saved, through the inner city mission stuff, and just saw the joy in missionaries who just had very, very little. So I grew up like very, very interested in inner city, and then as soon as I became a Christian, I thought I want to be a youth pastor, because youth pastors get to take people to basketball games and play basketball with people. So that just seemed like a really fun, interesting job. And a lot of good Christians in the U.S. applied to Wheaton, wanted to study theology there. And I got to study abroad right before I was doing my college application. So I went to Taiwan and was studying in a university there. And then just really found this passion for being with non-Christians and asking them questions. And I had just become a Christian, so for me it was so fresh and so interesting to be able to engage with people, and felt that the Lord really wanted me to be at a school with lots of non-Christians. So that was sort of like a common pattern in my life. I always wanted to do ministry, and the Lord kind of pushed me into marketplace or around to be engaging with sort of the workforce. Went to college at Emory, and I was thinking that I still wanted to be a pastor. So I was taking Greek and Hebrew classes there, and I was the only undergrad in these classes, like so weird. And then I had to pick a major, so I picked business. Just 'cause I thought, for church planting, business would be really good. And they don't let you do theology for an undergrad major. So I did that, and ended up getting into finance and kind of trading, because I had done some computer programming when I was in high school. So that's how I rolled into the hedge fund side and the finance side. And then I guess the thing I want to highlight with these kind of different experiences is that I always had this tension between ministry and business. I think probably a lot of us as Christians have that tension around, at least for me as a new Christian, thinking, well, if I want to be a good Christian, I want to be a missionary or a pastor, and always getting pushed back into marketplace and what that looked like. So that's kind of what I wanted to highlight there. And then since then, I've sort of been in this entrepreneurial journey for about 10 years. So ended up starting a hedge fund, and have a holding company now that does a lot of different things that I'll talk about later. So the first question I kind of want to focus on is why I think as Christians we actually from a worldview and from a sort of just thought process standpoint actually have the best foundations to be great business people, and then why at the same time I think we've actually become some of the worst business people in reality. So I kind of want us to think through maybe why that is, why the Bible creates a distinctive element inside us as business people. So taking something like excellence, for example. Obviously, you guys know as Christians we're called to be excellent, but the world actually is, when they start businesses, is also called to be excellent too. So to me, that's actually not that distinctive. So that would be an example of the Bible does push us to excellence, but it's not like the secular world doesn't have excellence, because they do it too as well. But there are distinctives that I think make it unique for us as Christians. So wanted to think through that. So the classic sort of business passage maybe is parable of the talents, and it's one thing that I want to focus on. I think there are a lot of distinctives, but I'm going to focus on the distinctive of risk, because I think for Christians we have this unique ability to take risk on that I think that maybe our counterparts that don't have the same worldview don't have them. So I'll just read this, and then we can kind of chat through this a little bit. So Matthew 25, 14 and 30, parable of the talents. This is Jesus. For it will be like a man going on journey who called his servants and entrusted them to his property. To one he gave 5 talents, to another 2, to another 1, to each according to his ability. Then he went away. He who had received the 5 talents went at once and traded with them, and he had made 5 talents more. So also he who had the 2 talents made 2 talents more. But he who had received the 1 talent went and dug in the ground and hid his master's money. Now after a long time the master of those servants came and settled accounts with them, and he who had received the 5 talents came forward, bringing 5 talents more, saying, Master, you delivered to me 5 talents. Here I have made 5 talents more. His master said to him, Well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful over a little. I will set you over much. Enter into the joy of your master. And he also who had the 2 talents came forward, saying, Master, you delivered to me 2 talents. Here I have made 2 talents more. His master said to him, Well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful over a little. I will set you over much. Enter into the joy of your master. He also who had received the 1 talent came forward, saying, Master, I knew you to be a hard man, reaping where you did not sow and gathering where you scattered no seed. So I was afraid, and I went and hid your talent in the ground. Here you have what is yours. But his master answered him, You wicked and slothful servant. You knew that I reap where I had not sown and gather where I had scattered no seed. Then you ought to have invested my money with the bankers, and at my coming I should have received what was my own with interest. So take the talent from him and give it to him who has the 10 talents. For to everyone who has will more be given, and he will have an abundance. But from one who has not, even what he has will be taken away. And cast the worthless servant into the outer darkness. In that place there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. So, intense. This passage is intense. So question for you guys. So what did Jesus sort of point out as maybe the distinctives between these 3 people? Like, what were different? Why did he give 1 5 and 1 2 and 1 1? Yeah. So yeah, these people had different skill sets, right? So some of them got more talents, and some of them got less. And then I'm not going to focus that much on the teaching aspect, but so very quickly, what was the issue? What's the issue in this passage? Why was this master so sort of disappointed with this one servant? What did he do that was wrong?
He was crippled by fear, and therefore just hid what he was given away and did nothing with it. Where the master could have just put it into a bank and gotten the minimum some interest on top of it. So there's no level of effort, and it was totally scribbled up.
Yeah, I think there's fear. That's definitely one of the key points. Anything else?
He had a wrong conception of who the master was, which affected his whole relationship and behavior.
Right.
He thought he was a hard man. He assumed that he was, and that affected the rest of his behavior with his tenants.
That's right. Yeah, that's awesome. So I think those are the two main things that I want to highlight from this passage. Wrong view of who the master is or who God is, and then just fear. So when it comes to like risk taking, what do you guys think gives us as Christians the unique ability to take risk that maybe the world doesn't have?
And that even if you fall, that Jesus would catch you like he would, let you burn to ashes, basically. That you can never really fall too hard. You're with Jesus.
Right. There's like a faith and trust element, which allows you to take risk. Yeah.
Discernment, which is the Holy Spirit and prayer.
Yeah. There's a guidance aspect. Yeah.
I think even if we fail in this life, we're really living for the next. So
Right.
there's that kind of using this time to prepare for the eternal.
Right. I mean, even in this case, it doesn't seem like the issue is that more talents weren't produced. It was more around the fear side of it, right? So it for us, it's kind of like because we have this kingdom that's coming, we can't necessarily lose in some ways, right? To your point.
I guess that God is in control. So he's sovereign, but also it's on his hands. So it's kind of like, okay, when we fail, it's not just like, oh my gosh, we failed. But he has like, or like if we fail, it's not happening outside of his plan. We felt like, oh well, it's God's plan anyway, so try our best.
Yeah. I would say like that's the sovereignty of God, right? I mean, I think because we know that God is sovereign, we can't really actually take real risk because He's sovereign. So in some ways, we can't take risk. I mean, we could take human risk, but in the ultimate scheme of things, we don't really take on risk. Anything else?
That our worth isn't dependent on like how we do, so we don't have to worry as much about how we'll come across when we take risks.
Mm-hmm. Yep. That's good. Yep.
Also, our abilities aren't actually our own, so we have responsibility to use what God has given us,
Right.
Because they're not actually ours.
Right. Yeah, so it's almost an obligation to risk because what we have isn't ours in the first place. Yeah.
I'm just adding to what Korean said. God has given all of us the time and energy and the opportunity to be fruitful for what He has given.
Uh-huh.
And His master has suggested that the least he can do is to go to the bank and invest it in there.
Right.
But at times we wasted a lot of resources that God has given us.
Yeah.
Just like
Yeah, this verse is good. Someone back there has something I think I saw. No? Okay. I mean, just from like a very practical standpoint, one thing I think of is like, in general, like I think in general have a lower run rate. If you're like an entrepreneur at least, run rate is a huge, sort of factor when it comes to getting a business off the ground. We don't necessarily need to live in luxury and stuff like that because we don't have this security that's in like the nice things that we have. So we can run on a lower run rate. So I mean, there's probably a lot more reasons. But so we're gonna break down to 3 different times real quick. So this is the first time where love you at your tables to maybe discuss like what are the times that God has maybe called you to take risk, and how can you? Well, I guess I don't necessarily want to talk about the failure as much, but how does this message of our responsibility to take risks? So not everyone is called to be an entrepreneur. I think most people, go to sort of a job and work in that sort of structure. But we all are called to take risk. So it doesn't have to be leave my job and whatever. It could be small risks inside the workplace. In the next section, I'll talk a little bit about some of the risks that we've thought about. But talk through that a little bit. What I am so frustrated about with the Christian community is that most of the Christians that I come in contact with, to me, are the most risk-averse people. They are separating themselves, generally living in safe suburban environments. I think in the last generation of sort of the boomer generation and plus that, there was a huge movement away from cities to safe, good schools, and I think the entrepreneurial environment in terms of if you're an entrepreneur, you don't really come in contact with a lot of Christians. A lot of times because Christians don't want to take risks, they'd rather sort of go and make the safe option. So something I really want to challenge you guys with is where are you guys not taking biblical risk on, and maybe see if there's any type of takeaway or action that's from this message. So we'll take maybe 5 minutes real quick, so really quick, sorry, because we don't have a lot of time, and then talk about that at your tables.
But I wonder, so in Indonesia, very complicated your business approach. I work in have failed, be in debt because they tried to do this business, and then they'll come to me because they're like, I do that. I can't do this. I sort of wonder, I don't think so, but there is a reality to it now.
So I would say for me, my career, I having a my undergrad is in OHR, which was the job description. So kind of who I am, and that's one of I think in some ways, my first job basis at a very high I think one of the really best things we can positive good risk for me to actually take a job in the city. It's currently working out for the school students have to pass this
Kids to take the biggest because they were like, that doesn't matter. Let's go for it. And you say, and I did everything. So you should let the issue is if I fail, it's much harder than fail shooting at right? I think it's something about comparing this. I talk about people to take pulse as opposed to just take risks. Excellent tool. And so I think it's because knowing their master, having some sense of seeing their master, what type of master. So there's a knowledge base that I don't hear as like you know the consequences of it, how to do something. So maybe we're talking about how do we figure out giving you knowledge before we actually listen to something really don't know what
the basics is like for them to deposit $1 each day, then it's impossible. Another thing, basically just invite a friend, come over, and this lady and that's how at the same time in how we use the online license that's it is hard because women tend to for example,
It's like wrap up in like 1 minute.
For me, willing to make a decision.
basically microphone is better for to prevent it before it gets sorry, that's my job. She's the only one here.
All right, let's wrap up. Sorry, it's not enough time. I know it's super quick. I might just cut the second one just because we only have like 17 minutes left. So I'll skip to this. We have more time. We'll go back to the other one. But I think these conversations can definitely continue during lunch as well. So don't let this be the end of that. And I just want to also clarify. So I heard. I think there are people that take foolish risks, one. So that, we're not called to be fools. And then I also think like risk looks different depending on your life stage and the situation you're in. Actually, the second question I was going to ask is sort of where are you right now, and how does that determine the ways that you can sort of be a Christian. But maybe we'll go back to that. I want to just go through like this is like more of a classic evangelism type passage, and something that I'm thinking through that I'd love to sort of have us think through as a group. So a lot of you guys are probably familiar with this passage. We'll read it real quick. I'm not going to really do any deep exegesis on this, but 1 Peter 3:14-15, it says, "But even if you should suffer for righteousness' sake, you will be blessed. Have no fear of them, nor be troubled, but in your hearts honor Christ the Lord as holy, always being prepared to make a defense to anyone who asks you for a reason for the hope that is in you. Yet do it with gentleness and respect." So I actually am going to focus more on who asks you, that specific phrase. So a common issue that I have in the marketplace is that no one wants to ask me about my faith. I mean, that's just the reality of it, right? Like, no one, at least in my circles, I think there's this like sort of Christianese that I sometimes hear where people are like, don't speak with words, just do it with actions, and then people will ask and know that you're a Christian. The reality is, at least for me, maybe I'm just like not Christian enough, but people don't ask, they don't care, and they're just not really interested in asking those questions. So what I'm trying to think about typically is how can I get people to ask, not just from loving them and those kinds of things, but so the kind of framework that I typically think about are like, what are the sort of like stumbling blocks in some ways that I can put in front of people that will cause them to be like, it's like almost like a conversation starter. What are the places that I can have conversation starters with people based off of the decisions that I make in my life? So people typically are going to ask you about something if they see something that's different. So that's going to be sort of the big question in this section. Like, what are the things that are different that you're doing that are going to cause people to say, hey, like, why'd you do it that way? Or why are you doing this thing? So it's going to be, again, it's going to be different for every person. I'll walk through like some of the things that I've done. But again, these are not sort of everybody's situation is different, so you can't take these and say everyone should do this or that. And even when I'm talking about the suburbs or something like that, there are amazing opportunities for ministry in the suburbs. So I'm not saying that thing is bad or like what I'm doing is right or anything like that. It's more just thinking through like a framework for how am I going to set these maybe stumbling blocks or whatever it is in place so that people can ask. So I told you guys to start that I got saved through doing like inner city stuff. So my wife and I always wanted to, we were always interested in moving to like a lower income neighborhood. I could go, it's kind of a long story how it actually ended up happening. We actually were living in a nice area and we were sort of like, oh, we'll do it later kind of thing. We're passionate about inner city, but we'll do it after we have kids because we don't want to be that young, weird couple that's hanging out with kids in the inner city. And I mean, there are a lot of other kind of reasons why we sort of didn't want to do it. But I felt a calling to sort of pray about that. And then basically like God forced us to move through a lot of different factors that I can talk later about. So about 5 years ago, my wife and I moved to South Central. So a lot of people like joke that I'm like an Asian guy living in a mostly black neighborhood, and I drive a white truck. So we do like real estate stuff. So it's like sort of a weird place. So we go to a predominantly African American church, so one of the things that I have conversations with almost every single person with is in any business context is they'll say, at least in Los Angeles, they'll say like, where are you coming from, or where do you live? I mean, it's just a sort of just kind of a regular question that people ask, and so it's not the reason why we moved there, but it's sort of the benefit of moving there is I respond, oh, we live in South Central. And people are like, oh, is that a gentrifying area? Is that, is the property value going up? And that has actually started lots and lots of conversations because we talk about how, Jesus spent time with those that were disenfranchised and faced injustice. And most people don't know that story of Jesus. They think of more like the conservative Christian person. And we get to tell them about, Jesus is a radical person that cares about, these people that are facing injustices, and we're just there to be neighbors, and the conversation goes on, and it stirs a lot of sort of conversation. So that's like one stumbling block. Some other random things that we did, like our company name, our main company is called Fisherman Labs, and we do consulting for kind of Fortune 500 consumer brands, and so we're always like sort of meeting with CMOs, CEOs, COOs, director of products of different these consumer companies, and they're always asking us, fishermen, like, why'd you guys call yourselves Fisherman Labs? Like, what is fisherman? What does that have to do with anything? We actually worked on a fishing project for Walmart, a huge fishing project, which is totally ironic. But we explained to them, Charles, my business partner, and I, we met in the church, and there were these 12 fishermen that became sort of the most sort of influential group of people to ever live, an influential group of people to ever live, which is, again, another distinctive around Christianity, having this massive influence. And that's a conversation starter. So it's a small thing. Everyone asks us it, though. And it could be anything. It could be any sort of name or anything. And another random stumbling block for me is like, so I have a tattoo for my ring, which is a nail. So a lot of people just like will just ask me like, oh, hey, why do you have the tattoo on your hand, or what is that? What is it? Whereas like a normal ring, most people are just going to assume like, oh, you're married, so I'm not going to ask you anything. So a lot of conversations start with, oh, what is it? And I explain to them a nail. It's like, why do you have a nail on your hand? And then I get to sort of talk about marriage in the context of the gospel and those kinds of things. And so these are just like random. It can be like almost anything. But I want to sort of challenge you guys to think about ways that you can do things differently that will cause people to say, or in the normal course of a conversation, like what are the everyday questions that you guys get, and how can that lead to some type of conversation about the gospel or Christianity, or just talking about story or something interesting around faith. Because my experience is that those conversations do not typically happen just sort of organically. I wish they did, but they usually don't. Sometimes they do, but most of the time they don't. So maybe, again, we only have 10 minutes left, so maybe take 5 minutes again. Any type of ideas that you all have, maybe talk about that in your groups, and we'll wrap up with one last thing. Last section, and then I'm between you and your lunch, so we're gonna wrap up as fast as possible. So I'm not gonna go through the passage, but I kind of want to again, a lot of this is more just like sampling of experience, more so than the foundation behind it, which we could talk a lot about later on. But so one kind of unique thing about me is that kind of involved in a lot of different businesses. None of them are really like that. It's not like they're like hugely successful businesses. There's just a lot of them. So I get the opportunity to sort of think through how what the purpose of each one is, how it connects, and so I've thought a lot about those kinds of questions. So last thing I want to sort of challenge you guys with is around wherever you're at, whether it's a skill set or a position or wherever you're at in life, to try to think through how you can use that thing, that position, that position or whatever it is, to do something interesting from sort of a ministry standpoint. So we originally started Fisherman Labs, and our goal was we wanted to do something cash flow generating because we didn't want to raise venture. We felt like that was going to inhibit us from making some of the decisions that we wanted to make. So that was sort of an intentional decision to have like a sort of a tree trunk business that we could use to sort of have flexibility to do things. So Fisherman Labs we're predominantly software developers. And software developers, the interesting thing about software is it can be done anywhere. So we can have software development internationally, here, it doesn't really matter. And so some of the unique things about that from a mission standpoint is that missionaries have increasingly more issues getting into countries with long-term visas. A lot of short-term missions ends up being wasted sometimes because you might be a computer programmer, but you go to India to build a house, where the people in India are better at building a house than you, and you may be better at computer programming. So you're not actually the skill sets are not aligned. Number 3, funding is becoming an increasing issue as the West is becoming more secular and there's just less of a funding base. And then number 4, and a lot of sort of missions, you're typically working in education and healthcare more with sort of the lower income side of the country, but not a lot of people are engaging with the workforce or the professional workforce. So business in software can partner with other local organizations to help with some of those things. So we intentionally put a software development company in Lahore, Pakistan, and we work with local missionaries there and local churches to see if we can engage with the workforce, to see if we can we reinvest all the profits, since we don't, that's not the purpose of our company, is not to make money from the outsourcing. So all those profits go back to fund missions. There's project managers that get visas through our company that can do stuff, and the government's pretty happy with us, even though in general they're not super stoked with Christians. So that's an example of software development. We ended up starting a real estate fund from some of the profits that we made, and we invested in lower income areas which typically have higher returns. So good for business, but also interesting from a development standpoint. So we're in Detroit and in low-income areas in Los Angeles. Then we have a credit fund that's a microfinance fund that's we started out of so we donate money to a foundation. So a lot of our money from fishermen goes to reinvest into real estate. Then some of our money goes into a foundation that's used to fund things in the local areas that we're investing in. So we're able to go and partner with a nonprofit or a Christian organization in a certain area in Detroit, for example, where a lot of our real estate is, where we can we're working with the city, like housing police officers at a lower rate to help lessen crime and. There's a lot of different reasons why that is. A lot of cops don't make enough money in Detroit to live near the city, so they have to drive 2 hours, and they have to, and their check-in's at 6 a.m., so they're waking up like 4 a.m. to get in, and if they miss, if they're late a couple times, they get kicked out of the academy. So stuff like that, where we're able to help the local police force and different things like that. So I could talk a lot more about that, but that's real estate. And then we have a food company, which we just started recently, that we were talking about on the ramen side. A lot of the reason why we started that was frustration around the fact that in software we typically are only hiring people with higher education, software developers, things like that. Whereas with food, you have the ability to hire all across the entire supply chain, so manufacturing, logistics, fulfillment, and you're able to also use that food to feed people and create community and things like that too as well. And we intentionally have a product that's affordable and nutritious. So these are just ideas of ways that we have taken the opportunities that are in front of us and tried to think through, like, how does the gospel shape how that business interacts with the people that we touch, whether it's software or food or real estate or microfinance or whatever it is. How can we use those different areas to have an impact in an interesting or unique way where it'll actually help people prosper in those neighborhoods and different things like that. So just again, I'm throwing out ideas to get you guys thinking about the positions that you're in and how you can use those specific things to sort of integrate your faith into those things. Yeah, just want to close with that. We could. I don't think we have time. We don't have time for the discussion stuff. So I'll just pray and close this out, and then maybe if you guys want to talk more about maybe things that you can do at lunch, or maybe for yeah, or forget about it, whatever. I'll pray and close this out. Lord, thank you for just giving us the ability to sort of come together and process through some of these things. We pray, Lord, that you would cause us to have action, Lord. We pray that you would give us just ideas, Lord, on how we can integrate our faith into the workplace, whether we're starting a new business or we're working at a huge company or whatever it is, Lord. We pray that you would give us innovative ways for us to integrate the things that we're passionate about in terms of our faith into the workplace. God, we pray for amazing conversation during lunch, and we pray this all in Jesus' name. Amen.